In this video, we're going to look at statements that allow our programs to decide what to do based on a condition. So for example, here's a function called abs value. It takes in a number x and it returns the absolute value of that number. So for example, if we pass in -5 for x, then what's going to happen is x is assigned -5, we jump to the function, and the first thing we hit is this new type of statement called an if statement. And we have a condition here, x is less than 0. And in this case, that condition is true because -5 is less than 0. And therefore, we're going to do the statement or statements that are indented underneath that if. So in this case, we're taking the current value of x, we are multiplying it by -1. So -1 times -5 is +5. That +5 is then stored back into the variable. And now when we come down here and return x, we're going to be returning +5, which is what we'll see at the shell. If on the other hand we passed in a positive integer for x, then when we hit this if statement, the condition is not true because 10 is not less than 0. And therefore we're going to skip this line that's indented and go to whatever comes afterwards. So this time we're not going to change the value of x, we're just going to return the value that was passed in. And you can see that in either case what we're getting is the absolute value of what was passed in. And so the if statement allows us to decide whether we should change the value or not. So this is known as an if statement. And this is the simplest form of conditional execution. We have the keyword if followed by some condition, followed by a colon. And then we have a block of one or more statements that are indented the same amount. And that is what I'm calling the true block. In this case, our true block only has a single statement, but it could have more than one. And in general, we're going to evaluate the condition. If it's true, we're going to execute the true block, but if it's false, we're going to skip over it. Sometimes, rather than just choosing whether to do something or not, we want to choose between two options. And for this, we can expand our if statement to include an else component, also with a colon after it, and then another block of statements which I'm calling a false block. So if the condition is true, we're going to execute the true block. Otherwise, we're going to execute the false block. And so you can see that the flowchart is a choice between two options. Either the true block, which again is one or more statements, or the false block, which can be one or more statements. And it's all based on whether the condition is true or not. Here's an example of a two-way decision. I have a function called pass-fail. It's taking a numeric average. If the average is greater than or equal to 60, we're going to assign the string pass to the variable grade. Otherwise, we're going to assign the string fail to the variable grade, and then we'll return the appropriate string. Now, what are the options for the conditions? So we have less than or greater than. We can do less than or equal to. Notice the equal comes after. We can do greater than or equal to. If you want to compare things to see if they're equal, you need to use two equal signs, not just one, because a single equal sign is used for assignment. And then not equals is an exclamation point followed by an equal sign. When we evaluate a condition in Python, we get one of two values, capital T true or capital F false. For example, if I enter 10 less than 20 at the shell, I'll get true because 10 is less than 20. If I enter the string Jones equals the string Baker, I'm getting false because those two strings are not equal to each other. And it's important to realize these values, true and false, are not strings. They are actually literal values from a special type known as the bool type. If I use the type function on the literal value true, you can see that it gives me the type bool. I can also use the type function on an expression like 30 greater than 6, and because it evaluates to a bool, I'm going to also see that type. Any expression that evaluates to true or false is known as a Boolean expression, and true and false are Boolean values. We can form more complex conditions by using what are called the logical operators, and, or, and not. And they either combine Boolean expressions or they modify the value of a Boolean expression. And I've summarized how they work here on this slide. You can find more information in the textbook. Now, when we talk about blocks, our true block and our false blocks, that notion of a block is a more general one. And as we said, it can contain more than one statement. So for example, here, our true block has two statements. So if the string that we pass in for the variable year is equal to the string frosh, we're going to print these two lines. But otherwise, we're going to print these three lines. And so that's another example of a two-way decision. How do you know where a block begins and ends? Well, a block begins whenever we increase the amount of indenting. So because we're adding additional indenting here, this starts a new block. And as long as we maintain at least that much indenting, the block is going to continue. And a block ends when one of two things happens. Either we reach a line with less indenting than the start of the block. So for example, here you can see the else has less indenting than the first line of the true block. And so the true block ends when we hit this else line. The other option is we reach the end of the program. So here we're beginning our false block because we increase the indenting, and that false block continues as long as we have at least that much indenting. But then we end up hitting the end of the program down here, so that false block ends. This function is supposed to take a numeric average and return the appropriate letter grade, but as it stands it doesn't work. Let's trace through a case to see why. So if we pass in 95 for the average, we begin with the first if statement, and the condition is true, so we assign the string A to grade. But the next condition is also true. 95 is greater than or equal to 80, and so now the grade becomes B. And all of these conditions are true, so we keep updating the grade. And then we finally skip this last assignment because it's in the false block, and we return the string D. So we get the incorrect return value here. What we'd like to do is not have separate if statements here, but one big multi-way decision. And we can do that in Python by changing these later conditions from ifs to elifs. And by doing that, we create one big multi-way decision, and we're going to be choosing from among these possible options. And so now when we pass in 95, the first condition is true, we do its true block, and we skip all of the others, and we return the string A. More generally, you can have, after the first if, as many elifs as you want, each with their own condition and their own true block. The conditions are evaluated in order. The first condition that is true gets its true block executed, and then we skip all the rest. And we're only going to do the false block if all of the conditions are false. And here's what the flowchart looks like for that. So again, as soon as you get a condition that's true, you do its block, you skip all the rest.